Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar titled Save Money by Understanding Your Auto Insurance. This webinar is hosted by Dale Appel Personal Injury Law, and attorney Dale Appel will be the person that will be presenting the webinar. But before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that if you have any questions at all, please go to the Q&A button on your little panel, on your webinar panel, and type in your questions. And at the end of the webinar, Dale will answer the questions that you may have. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Attorney Dale Appel, who will start the webinar. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for joining me this morning. I look forward to talking to you about saving money by understanding your auto insurance. Certainly, as I mentioned in the webinar email you received, with inflation all around, saving money any way you can is important. First, I want to start off talking about why me, why I'm appropriate for listening to in regard to this seminar. And the answer as to why me is because I'm old. I know I'm old because I recently left a store and there was a person in their early 20s that had a Duke cap on. And I said, "Oh, I went to Duke." And he said, "Oh, I'm going there now. When did you graduate?" And I told him I graduated from Duke Law in 1989. And his answer was, "Wow," as in, "Wow, you're old." And that reminds me that I didn't say 1945, I said 1989, but that was before cell phones were widely used. And it suggests that I have a lot of experience in life. And I have a lot of experience also in this area of auto insurance, because for the last 33 years, I've been practicing law. After a brief stint as a real estate attorney, I've been focused in the area of personal injury. About 80% of my practice is auto accidents, and the rest is medical malpractice and premise liability. So today, what I'm hoping to do is talk to you about auto accidents, auto insurance, and how to save money with understanding how auto insurance policies work. So that if you get into one of these situations where you're in an auto accident, you can be sure that at the end of the day, you'll feel protected. So auto insurance should provide an umbrella so you feel comfortable in an auto accident, that you won't have financial difficulties while you do things such as get treatment for your injuries, figure out issues regarding your property damage, and be able to move on with life going forward. But while we're looking at issues of understanding your auto insurance and saving money, it's important that we consider how much you're saving versus the potential risks you have by cutting back on your auto insurance. What we don't want to do is save just a couple of dollars and end up costing us a lot more dollars at the end of the day. So what I want to do is go through each of the types of insurance where you can save money, but where it probably doesn't make sense to do that. One of the things I want to do is talk to you about minimum coverage. This is the least amount of auto insurance that you can have on a policy in the state of Florida. I want to talk to you about PIP coverage, personal injury protection insurance, that is part of our no-fault system that we have in Florida. I want to talk to you about property damage insurance. I want to talk to you about bodily injury insurance, or BI, as it's known as in personal injury lingo. And I want to talk to you also about important additional coverage. That additional coverage includes things such as collision insurance, comprehensive insurance, and finally, something called or underinsured motorist coverage, or for short. Before we begin, I know that seems like a lot of terms, but you're in the hands of an expert, and I'm going to get you through this so that at the end, you'll have a better idea about auto insurance terms, how to save money, and even also the claims process itself, because there's a lot of opportunities to save money in that process as well. Things that people don't normally talk about, but that are going to be important to you should you get into an auto accident. So breathe deep, and here we go. So as I mentioned, the first thing I want to talk to you about is minimum coverage. So in the state of Florida, we have and operate under something called no fault. No fault means that regardless of who's at fault for an accident, you have to use your own auto insurance first with regard to any injuries that occur. So this law has been around for decades, and someday they may change that law, but currently we operate in this no-fault state. Before what's popularly known as Obamacare, a lot of people didn't carry health insurance. And so because there's a lot of accidents and an increasing amount of them in Florida, the emergency rooms were being inundated by people that didn't have health insurance coverage and no way to pay for their initial treatment after an auto accident. So the emergency rooms were left without any funds for reimbursement in the event that somebody got hurt in an auto accident and ended up in the emergency room. The other issue, though, was that people, even if they didn't go to the emergency room, were left without any kind of coverage before health insurance was more widespread and available to anybody that wanted it, since there was no pre-existing issue rules after the new law came into effect. And so people didn't know where to treat, and they sometimes either didn't get treatment or they relied upon Medicaid, or sometimes Medicare, but Medicaid in order to get treatment that they needed, especially for severe injuries. Less of an issue now, but we still operate in a no-fault state, even though last year there was great consideration about eliminating it. So in a no-fault state, we have the PIP insurance. PIP provides you up to $10,000 of coverage for things such as medical treatment, whether it be at an emergency room or after an emergency room. It also provides you for wage reimbursement in the event that because of an accident, you're not able to work or you're not able to work as much as you did before. It even provides for other types of coverage, including mileage reimbursement for going to and from medical providers. Or if you need a prescription medication, it'll provide for that reimbursement as well. So PIP coverage is something required of everybody in the state of Florida. If you don't drive a vehicle, or let's say you're in a vehicle and your child is with you, and of course they don't have PIP coverage directly through their own policy, PIP extends even to family members that live with you. So they're covered as well in an auto accident. If you don't drive a vehicle and you don't live with somebody, a relative who does, and you get hit by a car, you're a pedestrian, for example, or on a bicycle, then the person who hits you, their PIP insurance covers you in that event. So when they passed the law, they wanted to make sure everybody was covered for PIP insurance or PIP. The other minimum coverage that you have to have is called property damage. You have to have at least $10,000 worth of property damage insurance. So if you hit somebody and you're at fault for the accident and you damage their vehicle or their vehicle is totaled, this is the insurance that would cover that situation. And it is a requirement in Florida to have a minimum amount of coverage or at least $10,000 worth. You could have more, and it may be necessary to have more, because if you get into an accident, especially with the cost of vehicles nowadays, somebody may look to pursue you for additional coverage beyond that $10,000. And so it may be very important for you to consider having more, but $10,000 is the minimum amount of coverage that you can have on your policy. Now let's talk about property damage claims. Let's say you are hit from somebody from behind and need to pursue their insurance because they're responsible for the auto accident. And you have a repair or replacement of your vehicle that is greater than $10,000. A couple of things. The first thing to realize is that when you're in an accident and you're hit from behind, that it's the insurance company that's going to decide whether or not to repair or replace your vehicle. So when you make a call to the other party's insurance company, you're in their hands with regard to that decision. Normally speaking, insurance companies, if the repair is 70% or more, are going to decide to total the vehicle. And again, it's their choice. If the repair is 70% or less, though, they will likely repair the vehicle instead of totaling it. Now, some insurance companies have started to offer repair at their own chosen repair places. And they try to get you to use their repair places because they work a deal with these folks to charge less to the insurance company. We'll give you more business, a volume business, if you choose our repair shop. And we'll even include, sometimes they'll offer a carrot. They'll say, we'll include a long-term warranty. My advice is always not to choose the repair shop that is offered to you by the insurance company. And there's a good reason for that. You get to choose anywhere you want to go. I always like to go to the dealership. The dealership has no skin in the game. They don't have any relationship necessarily with the insurance company. They're going to be looking out for you. They're also realize that they have an insurance company that they're going to be billing to. So they'll use the best parts and do everything that they need to make you, the customer, happy instead of the insurance company, which is very, very important. So I always like to use the dealership. The other issue is that, as I mentioned, the insurance company chose these dealerships, these repair places on purpose, because they're going to save the insurance company money. And I've had situations when people have chosen to go to the insurance company's chosen repair shop where they'll get involved in the repair, and then they'll be halfway involved and they'll call up and they'll say, look, we have this issue here. There's something that needs to be replaced that is already worn out. And so it's not from the auto accident, it's because of years of wear and tear. And then you say, well, it wouldn't have known about it. It could have lasted for another 10 years if I didn't get into this auto accident. And they'll say, yes, that's true, but you need to give us money to replace that item on the wear and tear. We'll do everything else, but you owe us a couple $100 for the item that we're going to have to replace because it's worn out. And then you might get upset and say, oh boy, I wish I listened to Dale and I went to the dealership, and they'll put the car back together again for you. So you can do that, but they'll charge you hundreds of dollars to put the vehicle back together again. So it's important to not go down that road. And I think it's very important to choose the dealership. And when you do choose a dealership, before you leave the parking lot, make sure everything is working correctly before you leave, because it's hard to go back and blame the dealership if there's a problem that comes up. So test drive it while you're on the dealership parking lot. If the vehicle is totaled, then it's important to know that you can negotiate with the insurance adjuster for the full value of the claim. So if they tell you your vehicle's totaled, make sure that you go back and ask questions of the adjuster about why they got to that particular value for your vehicle. And it's really useful for you to look up Kelley's Blue Book or Edmunds online and get an idea about what the value of your vehicle is. And that way, when the adjuster comes back and says, we're offering you this amount of money, that you'll know whether or not that's an appropriate amount or not. So remember that you can negotiate this claim. With regard to diminished value, sometimes people will say, I got my vehicle repaired. The insurance company made that choice, but I know that when I go to sell my vehicle, that vehicle is going to be worth less money because I had it repaired and it was in this auto accident. And that's true. And so when you call the adjuster, you don't need to mention it initially. Let them determine whether it's going to be totaled or repaired. And if they repair it, after the repair is complete, you call the insurance company back up and say, I need money for the diminished value of my vehicle. Now, it's useful for you to have an idea about what that diminished value is. And so if you have friends in a dealership, or if you go back to where you purchased the car and you can put something in writing showing the value of your vehicle after the repair versus what it would have been worth before the repair, that could be very helpful to you in getting the diminished value claim. And I've seen people get a couple of $1,000s on that claim. So don't forget it's worthwhile. Another thing that's worth not forgetting is that if they do total your vehicle and they give you a check for the amount of money that that vehicle is worth, you have to go out and buy a new vehicle. And they're supposed to put you back in the same place you were before the vehicle was totaled. So when you go buy a vehicle, they're going to charge you sales tax. So wherever you're at, if it's an 8.5% sales tax, make sure they add that to the value of your total loss. And that can amount to significant savings, significantly more money. So be sure to include sales tax if your car is deemed a total loss. Another minimal coverage is bodily injury insurance. Now, some of you may be saying, bodily injury insurance, is Dale fibbing on that one? He's a lawyer, his lips are moving, so maybe he's not telling us the complete truth. And in this situation, I'd say you are correct. I am not giving you the complete truth because bodily injury insurance is not an absolute requirement in the state of Florida. But it's such an important part of your minimum coverage, in my opinion, because there's a draconian law that exists if you don't carry the minimum amount of bodily injury insurance, which is $10,000. So I would suggest that you definitely have at least $10,000 of bodily injury insurance, even though you theoretically could actually not have bodily injury insurance and still what's the full requirement of minimum coverage in Florida. And the reason I say that it's really something that you have to have, even though you can save money without it, is because Florida has a little known financial responsibility law. A financial responsibility law says that if you don't have at least $10,000 of bodily injury insurance, then the other party that you injured, either through property damage or through personal bodily injury, they can get a judgment against you or their insurance company and file that with the Department of Insurance, who then is authorized to take your license away for up to 20 years until you pay back that judgment. That's pretty draconian. And so there's a number of people in Florida driving around without a license because they did not have the minimal $10,000 worth of bodily injury insurance. And so that's why I share with you that although it's not actually required by law, the $10,000 in bodily injury insurance, that it is something that you, while saving money if you didn't have it, should spend the money on. So $10,000, in my opinion, is the minimum amount that you should have, but you should definitely have more if you have assets that are greater than $10,000. Some people say, I'm not concerned about injuring other people in an auto accident because really I don't have any assets for them to pursue, or I'm not able to work, or I'm head of household. So even if the other party gets a judgment against me for bodily injury, they're not going to be able to collect. So some people, $10,000 could be the appropriate amount of bodily injury insurance to have. But consider a couple things. If you have assets that are greater than $10,000, or if you have a job and you're concerned about a wage garnishment, or if you say, you know what, if I get a judgment against me, bankruptcy is a possibility, but I don't want to go through that, consider having more bodily injury insurance. Now, you don't want to have too much. I always say that it's important to have as much as your net worth, not necessarily including your home, because your home is protected by homestead laws. So you don't have to be concerned about a judgment and them taking away your homesteaded home, your primary residence. But if you have rental properties and a stock portfolio, you need to consider having more bodily injury insurance. And I say, have enough to match the amount of assets that you have. What a lot of people don't know is that when we send a demand in to an insurance company, we will often send in what's called a financial affidavit. A financial affidavit is where you have to share with the plaintiff, the person who's potentially going to sue you for injuries, you have to share the amount of assets that you have. The financial affidavit is something that can be a concern, a lot of concern, if you don't have enough bodily injury. If you have as much bodily injury insurance as you have assets, then you're going to say, well, you know what, I'm not concerned about that. Because when the plaintiff's attorney sees that I don't have any more, they're going to take the insurance. They're not going to come after me personally. Sometimes people try to save money, though. One of the ways that they try to save money is that they might change the name in which they hold assets. So I had a friend who had a property that they rented out and they fixed up, and that was their primary asset. It was a big asset, though. It gained a lot of value, and the asset was worth, in terms of equity, $2 million. They put that asset wisely into a corporation, and they thought, oh, I'm protected. I don't have to worry about being sued because I don't have anything. All my real net worth is in that very expensive asset that I bought inexpensively, and it went up a lot after I fixed it up. But then they got the affidavit. And what was worse is when they got into the accident and they rear-ended the other person, they were driving a very expensive vehicle. So they knew that the plaintiff may realize that this person had a lot of money. And so may be saying, wow, let's go see what this person has in terms of assets. This person, thinking that they were protected from lawsuits, purchased the minimum amount of bodily injury insurance. They only had $10,000. In the financial affidavit, there was a question that said, do you own any companies, and how much are those companies worth? And so that person called me in a sweat. What were they going to do? Were they going to potentially commit fraud, insurance fraud, and lie on an affidavit? You do not want to be in that situation. So make sure that you consider getting as much bodily injury insurance as you have assets. Another issue that happens is that sometimes people's assets will go up and they'll forget to have an increase in their auto insurance. It's one of the things that's easy to slip by and not think about. So I had somebody call me recently whose spouse had passed away, and they had a large life insurance policy that was made in part to protect their disabled child who had difficulties, and they wanted to have a lot of money available to take care of that child. Unfortunately, that person got into an auto accident. They had $25,000 worth of bodily injury. But then that person got the affidavit, and all of a sudden they realized, oh my gosh, we didn't do anything to protect the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I now have that I potentially am going to have to reveal in this affidavit. And so the plaintiff's lawyer may be saying, well, why am I going to take your $25,000 when I can go and get several hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash? And so now this person was faced with a dilemma about how to fill out that affidavit, another situation you don't want to be in. And they were thinking about doing things such as asset protection. But at that point, it's likely too late. You can't just transfer your assets after you know about an accident and a potential lawsuit. The judge can do what's called a clawback because you can't fraudulently transfer assets after you know about a potential lawsuit. So don't get into that situation. Make sure you have enough bodily injury insurance. Another issue that sometimes comes up when people try to save money is that I had somebody that moved from another state, and they wanted to, they had a property in the other state, but they moved to Florida. And then years after they moved here, they got into an accident, but they never told the insurance company about their move. And they didn't do that for a good reason. Florida, because we have a lot of accidents here, and maybe some people say because we have a lot of personal injury attorneys, but we have a lot of accidents, and those number of accidents are only increasing as people continue to move down here, has higher insurance rates than a lot of other places around the country. So they were able to continue to say, I have a home in another state. Insurance is a lot less there, so I'm not going to tell my insurance company about my change. But litigation pursued, was filed, and this person was faced with a deposition where they would have to reveal that they never told the insurance company, and they were suing their own insurance company in this situation about the change in their location. But once the insurance company found out that they had moved years before, never told them, the insurance company would be able to back away and say, we're not providing you any coverage. So be sure that if you have a change in circumstances, like a move, that you inform your insurance company within a reasonable amount of time so you don't find yourself in a situation like this person did without any coverage. Those are the minimum coverages. Let's talk about important additional coverage. One of the important additional coverage that it very well may be important to spend money on is called collision insurance. Collision insurance is insurance that you utilize if you get into an accident with somebody that doesn't have insurance. In the state of Florida, you know what the law is now. The minimum is $10,000 at least of property damage. But for the reasons we talked about, some people don't carry any insurance. There's a lot of people that are uninsured, despite the potential consequences under the financial responsibility law. Collision insurance will protect you. It'll also protect you in the event that you do something like hit a tree, or if your car rolls over, or if you hit a deer. So collision insurance is very important. If you have a loan on your vehicle, as many people do, your finance company will require that you spend money on collision insurance. Another one is something called comprehensive insurance. Comprehensive insurance covers things besides getting into an accident with someone without insurance or hitting a tree. It covers things such as vandalism, or if there's flooding. It even covers you if your car is stolen. So it can be very important to get comprehensive insurance, whether or not you have finance the vehicle or not. The other thing to realize is that the value of your vehicle, of course, is going to go down over time. And so one of the ways to save money would be to reduce the amount of comprehensive or collision insurance as your vehicle depreciates. Finally, let's talk about another important additional coverage, and that is something called underinsured motorist coverage, or for short. Uninsured motorist coverage protects you in the event that you get into an accident with somebody that doesn't have insurance, and there's a lot of them in Florida, or somebody that doesn't have enough insurance. Let's say they just have the minimum of $10,000. So if you get into an accident, you go to the emergency room, you use up your PIP, you begin to have treatment after the emergency room. And as you know, with the cost of emergency rooms can be much greater than $10,000. And let's say you do have health insurance. Your health insurance can have very high deductibles and co-pays. And there may be things that your health insurance doesn't cover. Or if you don't have health insurance, it'll be important to consider the additional bills that you might have in gaining in order to get better. Or let's say you have a wage loss claim for a period of weeks and sometimes months, you may not be able to work. So it's going to be important to be able to get that money back. The only way to do that is to be able to make a claim against the other party's insurance. And then, of course, if you are injured and have a permanent injury in the state of Florida, you're likely to want to have a sense of justice by getting compensation for pain and suffering. And sometimes people say, I'm not concerned about pain and suffering. But pain and suffering means a lot of things. It can mean not just compensation for having to go through treatment, for having to suffer with injuries the rest of your life. Because of the injuries you have, you may have to change your lifestyle. So, for example, you may never have considered getting help around the house before. I mean, I do my own house cleaning, or I mow my own lawn or clean my own pool. But with the injuries, it may not be so easy to do that. It may be important to consider hiring somebody. So the money that you receive for pain and suffering may be important for those types of issues and those types of monies so that you can live with your injuries and not have to try to do the things that you're no longer really capable of or not capable of doing this type of manual labor without help. So it's important to consider having this uninsured motorist coverage. So if you file a lawsuit against a person who's at fault, they may have only bodily injury insurance, as I mentioned, of $10,000. But your claim may actually be worth $500,000 when you add up the loss of wages, the loss of future wages if you're permanently disabled and not able to work, monies that you may need to accumulate for retirement, monies that you may need for aides at home, or as I mentioned, somebody to help do laundry around the house, or other kinds of physical labor that you used to be able to do, or for pain and suffering, just to make your life a little bit easier. You will then have to make a claim against your own uninsured motorist. And so some people say, well, how much uninsured motorist coverage should I get? I mean, I certainly see why it's important to protect myself, especially since a lot of people out there may not have insurance in Florida, or they may not have, or they have only the minimum of $10,000. Well, it is the law in Florida that you can get only as much uninsured motorist coverage as you have bodily injury. So if you only have $10,000 in bodily injury, the law says you can only get $10,000 in uninsured motorist. If you have $100,000 bodily injury on your policy, you can get $100,000 of uninsured motorist. Now, people realize, or insurance companies realize, that people are more interested in protecting themselves than they are generally in protecting other people. And so the insurance companies came up with a solution. They now have something that's called stacking insurance. And so what stacking insurance says is that we know that the law says that you can only have as much insurance as you have bodily injury insurance. So if you have 10,000 bodily injury or 100,000, you can only have 10,000 or 100,000 uninsured motorist coverage. But under the stacking provision of an insurance policy, if you have more than one vehicle on your policy, let's say you and your spouse have two vehicles, or even if you add your child onto the insurance, let's say you have three vehicles, you can put the uninsured motorist coverage of 100,000 on each one of those policies. So even though you have 100,000 of insurance, if you have three vehicles on the policy, you can stack that 100,000 all together so that you have a total of 300,000 of insurance. So that's something that you might want to consider, something called stacking. And I've seen people have stacking insurance. They were sold it by the broker, the insurance agent, or they may have inadvertently put it on their policy, even though they only have one vehicle on the policy. Well, the stacking in that situation does absolutely no good. So look on your own policy, see if you have stacking. If you only have one vehicle on your policy, or if you don't have uninsured motorists, know that that is worthless insurance for you, and you save money by taking off the stacking insurance provision. People often ask me, Dale, when are they going to be able to raise my rates? I'm not involved in this accident, and the other person didn't have enough insurance or didn't have insurance at all. And it doesn't seem fair that they're able to raise my rates, even though I don't have, it wasn't my fault, this accident. And fortunately, the Florida legislature sees it the same way. So there is a law that makes very clear that if you're at fault for an accident, the insurance company can raise your rates or drop you. It's their choice. But if you're not at fault for the accident, the insurance company can't do that. The insurance company can only raise your rates if you are not at fault and you have 3 or more not at fault incidences within a 3-year period or 36 months. So if you get into an accident and you use your PIP, no problem. Get into an accident, you have to use your uninsured motorist coverage because the other person didn't have or only had $10,000 in bodily injury, no problem. You have 2 accidents that are not your fault within a 36-month period, no problem. They can either raise your rates or drop you. And if your rates go up, you could even, under the law, send the insurance company a letter and say, Dale Appel told me that they can't do this. They can't raise my rates or drop me. Why did you raise your rates, my rates? And they will send you back a letter. Under the law, they have to. And they may explain, we didn't just raise your rates, we raised everybody's rates. If they do say we raised your rates because of the accident, and you have less than 3 not at faults within a 3-year period, then call me. We've had 2 different insurance companies try to raise rates. We were able to get that reversed. those two insurance companies are now out of business, not because of us, because generally it's only the third-rate insurance companies that'll even try to raise your rates by you making a claim for not at fault. But realize that a glass break claim will qualify as one of your 3 not at fault incidences. So be aware of that. So a glass break claim, people thought, that's not an accident, it's not going to count. But believe me, the insurance company is looking for an opportunity potentially to raise your rates or drop you. So they do count. I've included this picture to let you know that we are now done with learning the terms of an auto insurance policy. Hopefully you got some ideas about how to save money, where it's appropriate to cut and where it's not. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. Sue?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dale. We actually did receive a few questions that came in. So I'm going to start with the first one. One of them is, when I rent a car, do I need to buy their insurance?
That's a great question. And it's an important one because I rented a car recently and the rates are really expensive for even minimal rental insurance coverage. And the answer is, as many things, the answer is maybe. You may need to purchase the rental car coverage. What you should do is look at your own auto insurance policy because that's going to govern whether or not they cover rental. Most of the time they do, but look for it in the policy or call the broker or the insurance company and have them direct you to the portion of your policies, because policies can be quite long and involved, where it says whether or not they provide coverage. And also look to see how they provide coverage. For example, they may provide for a collision, for property damage, but they may not provide for liability issues. And you're going to want to know whether they provide for the coverage that covers you for both property damage, uninsured motorist, and for injury that you might cause to others called liability, bodily injury insurance. You're going to want to know the difference. And if there are gaps, if there's areas where they don't cover, and you travel a lot and rent a car a lot, you might want to consider one of the credit card companies that offer coverage when you rent a car. Some of them are better than others. Some of them provide that kind of full umbrella of protection, and some of them don't. But given the expense of rental car, especially for multiple days, and versus the cost of some of these credit cards that provide an annual premium, like Chase has a card and American Express, it may be worthwhile renting under those cards, but make sure to read even their coverage to make sure it provides the full coverage that you're looking for, so that you have that umbrella in case you have a rainy day while you're traveling with the rental car and get into an accident.
Okay, great. Here's another question. If I lend my car to a friend and they get into an accident, can I be held responsible?
If you lend your car to a friend, you unfortunately can absolutely be held liable for anything that they do to cause injury to another person, whether it be the property damage or even the injury. You're on the hook. There are limits to that liability, but the limit is $500,000. And that's assuming that the person who's in the vehicle actually has insurance coverage. So whether they have insurance coverage or not, you are on the hook. So that when we sue somebody, one of the first questions that we'll ask is the owner and the driver different people? If they are different people, then we're going to include both the owner and the driver in our lawsuit. So be careful who you lend to and make sure you have that proper insurance coverage. And just by the way, if your car is stolen, now that's different. You're not covered for a stolen car. You're not responsible for a stolen car situation unless you did things such as leave your keys in the car. Then that would be considered perhaps negligence. And in that situation, you may be held responsible.
Great. We just have a couple more here. What is an umbrella policy and do you recommend it?
I'm glad you asked. So an umbrella policy is a policy that you get to provide additional coverage over and beyond the amounts that your auto insurance can provide. So all auto insurance have a limit. 10,000 is the minimum. But normally an auto insurance company will sell you up to maybe 250 and sometimes up to 500,000. But I don't think I've ever seen a policy go beyond $500,000. And some of you may say, well, gosh, I'm fortunate, I'm blessed, I have more than $500,000 in assets. So what am I going to do? They're only going to sell me up to $500,000 of auto insurance, bodily injury coverage, or even uninsured motorist coverage. You can then buy an umbrella policy. And generally the umbrella policies come in $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, even more. And what's great about umbrella policies is they're relatively inexpensive. In trying to protect your own assets from lawsuits, it's important to have a really deep moat, and the umbrella policy provides that moat. And fortunately, it's, like I say, rather inexpensive, especially for the size and the depth of the moat that it provides. Because only so many auto accidents creates injuries with injuries that are greater than $1 million, that's the reason why the insurance companies can provide you that type of coverage rather inexpensively on a yearly basis, especially relative to the assets you have. So I don't recommend getting more umbrella policy than you have assets, but definitely it's worthwhile to make sure that you match the amount of assets you have with the size of the umbrella policy. The other thing about umbrella that's nice is that in addition to covering you for things such as auto accident, it oftentimes will cover you for things that you wouldn't even normally think of, like defamation or libel suits, which can be important, especially nowadays with social media. It can even cover you if you're on vacation and you borrow or rent a boat and you're out on the water and cause an accident with injury, something that people don't normally think how they're going to be sure to have insurance coverage in that situation. So umbrella policy can cover you in a lot of areas other than auto accidents. And if you have that much in assets, is really, really worthwhile to get. So get as much umbrella as covers your assets.
Great. Another good question. Are your retirement assets protected from someone suing you?
In the state of Florida, your retirement assets are generally covered by retirement type vehicles. It's one of the reasons why Florida is known as a debtor state. Debtors are happy here. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be careful with the amount of insurance you have, but it may be a consideration. I mentioned earlier homestead. So if you have a lot of equity in the home that you live in, you may decide not to include that in your determination about how much umbrella policy to have or how much auto insurance. Things such as an annuity or a 401k, those things are protected from claims of creditors. It's one of the reasons why O.J. Simpson was happy to be in Florida with his NFL annuity worth many millions that he was living off of, even though Nicole Simpson's family had a judgment greater than $20 million against him. They weren't able to collect because he had that annuity that was paying him out monies. So an annuity is another retirement vehicles, 401ks, even whole life insurance. Those are protected from the claims of creditors. But do be careful. Things such as home rentals that you have. You may think, oh, those are for retirement. Those are still included in your assets. And again, you could do some asset protection. You could put those properties into trusts. You can put them into corporations. But as I mentioned, that affidavit will be coming to you if you cause injury. So realize that you may need to reveal those asset protection vehicles for your rental properties. It's a lot less expensive to make sure you have a good umbrella policy in place.
Great. We have time for about maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So I'm going to, we have another one here. If I'm in an auto accident, what do you recommend I do while I'm still at the scene?
So after an auto accident, it is important to be aware of things that you can't get to after you leave the scene. So one of the most important things, other than calling 911 if anybody's injured, is to make sure that you collect the names, addresses, emails of any witnesses. Even in a rear end accident, you may think, it's a rear end accident. It's kind of clear what happened here. Liability shouldn't be an issue. But even in those situations, sometimes we've seen people claim that you suddenly stopped in front of them when you shouldn't have. People come up with all kinds of stories about how they're not responsible for accidents. So in any situation, once you call 911 and call the police to get an accident report, and which that's something that I generally would recommend if you're not at fault for an accident, is to call the police if they're willing to come to the scene, because sometimes if there's no injuries in particular, they are not willing to, is to see if you can gather the contact information for witnesses. If you have time and the witness is willing, even writing out just 2-3 sentences about what they observed and getting them to sign that statement could be very important. The next thing to do would be to take pictures, because once you leave the scene, those pictures are no longer of any value. Certainly take pictures of the at-fault party's vehicle as well as your own. The at-fault vehicle, once it leaves the scene, is not coming back. And sometimes your vehicle may not have much property damage, whereas the at-fault vehicle does. And that can be very important in making a claim. The insurance companies certainly do not like to pay monies if there's not meaningful property damage for injuries. You may say, well, gosh, I was severely injured. It just doesn't show up in the actual physical damage to my car. But boy, you should have seen the other car. But sometimes the other car is no longer available. So we have no idea and nothing to show the insurance company. So take pictures of the other vehicle and take pictures of the accident scene, which may change from the time that you leave the accident. So be sure to do your documentation at the scene. And then, of course, to the best of your ability, especially if the insurance company, or excuse me, the police officers do not come to the scene, get as much information as you can from the at-fault party. That includes insurance information, title, who owns the vehicle, but that's the most important things to consider at the scene of an accident.
Okay, we have time for about 2 more questions. One came in that might be related to the retirement assets, but maybe you can just clarify this. Is IRA protected?
Your IRA is protected. It's in the same category as a 401k, an individual retirement plan. So just like those types of retirement vehicles, an IRA is a protected asset from the claims of creditors.
Okay, great.
In the state of Florida, and generally throughout the country, but certainly in Florida.
Last week, there was a new law regarding insurance that Governor DeSantis signed. Does that affect me?
That affects everybody. It was a significant change in the law, more changes probably than occurred in decades. So within a very short period of time, there was a lot of significant issues. They only become significant if you're in an auto accident. One of the things, though, to consider is the fact that the amount of medical bills that you can show to an insurance company, more importantly to a jury, but the insurance company knows this, has been significantly reduced. In the past, if people didn't have health insurance, we used to be able to get reimbursed for the bills from the doctors when we provided something called a letter of protection. It was a guarantee between us, the medical provider, and the client that they get paid at the end of a case. Unfortunately, the new law says, while you can provide a letter of protection, they're really virtually worthless now. I say that because before, the doctor used to be able to charge at least what health insurance would charge or whatever they wanted. Now they can only charge 120% of what Medicare reimbursement will be. So a lot of doctors, we anticipate, will disappear. They will no longer accept a letter of protection. So anybody that gets into an auto accident with significant injuries that doesn't have health insurance is going to face some real significant issues with getting care going forward because of this change in the law. Now, fortunately, under the new, what people call Obamacare, you can get health insurance after the fact, but you need to be prepared to do that. You also need to realize that those insurances often come with high copays and deductibles. So that is probably the most significant issue. The other issue you have to realize is that the statute of limitation has changed from 4 years for filing a lawsuit to only 2 years now. So it is important, more important than ever, that after an auto accident, that if you have injuries, that you consider contacting an attorney with the possibility of filing suit a lot sooner than you normally would. So that 2 year from 4 year is a very significant change. There's a lot of other changes that affect issues that may cause insurance companies to be less likely to do the right thing, but that gets into details and complications that are not as important. It's probably safe to say, if you've heard, that there's been tens of thousands of lawsuits filed in the last week or so in order to protect rights. And the reason plaintiffs' attorneys did that was because the law changes are so draconian that they wanted to do their best to, for the most part, in many cases, protect the current clients that they had. So it is something that is significant. But as far as making changes to your auto insurance before an auto accident occurs, there's not that much that you can actually change that's significant to you, other than just realizing that health insurance and having it is more important than ever. Unfortunately, as far as saving money, the new law does not say anything about lowering your rates. Your hope is that these new laws that tend to protect insurance companies and businesses will result someday in lowering your insurance rates, but certainly that is no guarantee. That's just a hope at this point.
Wow, that's fantastic information. Dale, I appreciate you taking the time to hold this webinar. I also appreciate everyone that attended the webinar itself. I hope you received some very valuable information. Dale will be available to answer any questions, to take a one-on-one. If you would like to contact Dale Appel directly, you can either email Dale at dappel@wefightforjustice.com, or you can contact him at 813-877-3253.
If you'd like me to review your individual policy, definitely let me know. Be glad to do that. Be glad to answer any questions that come up after this webinar. And certainly, I appreciate your joining me today, and I thank you very much. Hopefully you've gotten a lot out of this and can now save money by understanding your auto insurance.
Thank you. This concludes our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at our next one. Thank you, everyone.